Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the draft Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Regulations 2023, which were laid before the House on 20th of March, be approved. Before I start, Mr. Speaker, can I mention that it is my normal practice to take as many interventions as I possibly can during a debate. However, this debate is on a statutory instrument and therefore limited in time. So I will take interventions, but I won't take the normal number that I would. And I will try and mop up all the questions raised in the debate at the end with the leave of the House. The Stormont Break is at the heart of the Westminster Framework. It addresses the democratic deficit, restores the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and ends the prospect of dynamic alignment. It restores practical sovereignty to the United Kingdom as a whole and to the people of Northern Ireland in particular. I will give way to my...
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. As someone who served in the province during the Troubles and saw firsthand the pain and anger endured by all communities, does he agree with me that the Windsor Framework not only restores the balance of the Belfast Agreement, but also offers the province much greater prosperity by way of inward investment, and greater prosperity helps most situations?
I thank my honourable friend for his words, and yes, I do agree with him entirely. We are just coming up to the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which has built peace and stability across Northern Ireland. And I very much hope, as I do believe every single politician from Northern Ireland does, that the next 25 years of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, helped along by this Windsor Framework, will bring an age of prosperity to Northern Ireland like we've never seen before. I'll take. I'll take the three members. I'll go. Mr. Shannon first. Sorry,
Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the it's not often that I'm ahead of the other ones, but it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Secretary of State, we will have some difference of opinion on this. Does the Honourable Secretary of State understand our frustration on the Windsor Framework, or as we in unionism call it, the Windsor Knot? Is not a deal that enjoys or receives unionist support. Indeed, the United Kingdom gives the EU sovereignty over the courts and power over Northern Ireland. It has, I say this respectfully to the Secretary of State because I'm a respectful person, has been shoved through the House by the government. The Conservative and Unionist Party, with some dismay, I actually question now Conservative and where is the Unionist? In a format that doesn't allow for scrutiny or due processes. And on that point, Secretary of State, honourable members and others across this House should take note, and they should vote against this SI today, because it introduces a gravely important constitutional issue, and we're very concerned.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his words, which I fundamentally disagree with. I am a unionist. I'm very proud to be a unionist, and I believe that the foundations of this of our wonderful country make it, each of them make it stronger. And I do believe that this is a massive step forward in both progress for Northern Ireland, but the Union as well. I actually disagree with him entirely on his point. This actually adds to the democratic scrutiny that is available. And as one of Michel Barnier's former advisers put it, it does amount to a clear veto possibility for the UK government, directive by directive, at the behest of minority in the Northern Ireland Assembly. I think people who know what they're talking about understand that this is a very, very good deal. I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving... Who does the Secretary of State want? Help me.
Member for Caithness, please.
Jamie Stein.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say one thing to the right honourable gentleman, which is he talks about prosperity. But I have seed potato growers in my constituency telling me that this framework is very welcome indeed. It means that they can access the Northern Irish market and in turn, via mechanism, access the Republic of Ireland market. That is most welcome. That's about the prosperity of my constituency. And perhaps this may lead to access to the Spanish and French market, which could be useful in the future. So that's why I believe we should support the framework.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his very, very pro-unionist commentary. He's absolutely right. This for seed potatoes and for a whole host of other products that were no longer being, through the protocol, not available in Northern Ireland. The Windsor Framework solves those issues and opens that market up. I happily give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Very grateful for the Secretary of State for giving way. I thought I was going to have to do a whole lot of squats there just to get in. One of the criteria for using the Stormont Breaker for signing the petition says that MLAs using it must be individually and collectively seeking in good faith to fully operate the institutions, including through the nomination of ministers and support for the normal operation of the Assembly. Does this mean that Jim Allister will be excluded from signing that petition?
If the Assembly is sitting and he's sitting in it, which he would be as a fully elected member from his political party, then I'm absolutely sure he could sign said for the break. I believe there was one more person behind me.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Could I commend the Prime Minister and my right honourable friend for the work that he's done? Does it not show that when you build bridges, when you show pragmatism, when you work with our continental colleagues, we can actually provide results? Does he also agree that along with AUKUS, along with the Paris Summit, and indeed the budget, this is now a return to statecraft that we want to see in number 10?
It is without doubt statecraft emanating from number 10, and I pay tribute to the Prime Minister for everything that he does in that way. I'm going to continue just for a bit, if I may. I will come back in a moment. But in a democracy, we all believe, as Democrats here, people should have a say over any change to the laws under which they live. But under the old protocol, that was not the case. Changes to laws were automatically imposed on Northern Ireland, whether it wanted them or not. And as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, I, like many other members of this House, found this to be an unacceptable state of affairs. The Stormont break not only ends that, but ensures that changes to rules and regulations have the consent of both communities, asserting a fundamental principle of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I will happily give way to this honourable gentleman here.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend who has made this progress hugely possible through his hard work. Does he agree with me that wherever you're starting from, by comparing the Northern Ireland Protocol with the Windsor Framework, it is quite clear to everyone that good progress has been made and that it is an improvement and that it is welcomed by most of the communities in Northern Ireland very strongly indeed, and for that reason we should be supporting it tonight.
I thank the honourable gentleman. Yes, I do believe that, and I thank him for his point. As the honourable lady, honourable gentleman, and then I will continue. And yes, of course.
Thank the Minister for giving way, and he's making a powerful case about democratic scrutiny. In that spirit, then, will he also confirm, in order to support the Windsor Agreement, that he will use his powers as a Secretary of State to retain all the existing EU law that will be deleted by the EU law bill by the end of this year? Because the European Union has written to us today to warn that if he does not do that, this agreement will be in doubt. It's not to do with the Stormont broke, it is the existing legislation that will be deleted by the Sunset Clause. He has the power to retain it. Is he going to support this legislation?
I'm afraid I've not seen that letter. I know nothing of it, and I do believe that the retained EU law bill is going to do a good job of work for the whole of the United Kingdom. I'm going to give way to my honourable friend Farrelly. I'll take who's on their feet.
I thank Secretary of State. I fear today we will respectfully have to agree to disagree. But he has described the break on multiple occasions, including in BBC interviews, as a veto. Given that if Stormont pulls it, UK ministers may still not exercise the break in exceptional circumstances, so it's down to ministerial fiat, and also given that even if they do, the EU can object and it's referred to independent arbitration where the UK could lose, that is a route to arbitration, isn't it? That is not a veto. Will he accept that?
One, it is a veto. Two, it is a route to arbitration. And three, it removes any element of the ECJ being relevant in this decision. So I think we've actually delivered on some of the things that the honourable gentleman and I have campaigned on over the years. Gentleman, over there.
I am grateful, in respect of grounds for seeking to apply the break, in response to a written question to the Foreign Office, the Parliamentary and the Secretary of State replied, as to exports to Northern Ireland through the ports of Holyhead, he said, the Green Lane is open to all UK businesses where they import or sell goods that are not ultimately destined for the EU market. This includes goods travelling from Wales to Northern Ireland in transit through the Republic of Ireland using the transit procedure. Can you confirm that this is indeed the case and elaborate now or by letter how that procedure will actually work?
Secretary State.
I thank you for his question, which I don't think I heard completely, but the Green Lane will be open for goods travelling into Northern Ireland for consumption in Northern Ireland. There is a red lane that is for goods that are going into the Republic itself. If I misheard the Honourable Gentleman's question, I'll write to him and clarify if that's okay. I'm going to give way to the Honourable Gentleman for wait.
Grateful to the Secretary of State. Why do EU laws apply to businesses in Northern Ireland under this agreement that are not trading with the EU? How many EU laws apply, and why don't we see a list of them?
State.
It's less than 3%. It preserves access for Northern Ireland businesses to the single market, and as I detailed yesterday, I listed a whole host of the different areas by which EU laws are disapplied in Northern Ireland. I'm going to take two more interventions, one from the gentleman there and one from a former Secretary of State.
I'm extremely grateful to the Secretary of State. He's, of course, right to say that any political entity within a wider economic structure should have a say or some way of expressing his view in relation to the rules and regulations of that economic structure. With that in mind, will the British Government be bringing forward a saner than Hollywood break when it comes to the UK internal market?
I thought we already had it, but I shall come back to the Honourable Gentleman if that's not the case. To the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would my right honourable friend just reconfirm that this stormont break stops and gives total control to the Assembly in Northern Ireland on any new EU law or regulation? And secondly, that this deal has made huge strides from seed potatoes to VAT to state aid to customs to all aspects of the protocol that we in this House have debated for so long.
I have to agree with my right honourable friend. And I think what I best should do now, Mr. Speaker, is continue with this so I can explain this all to the House, because the break is triggered if 30 members of the Legislative Assembly, in a moment if I may, from two parties object to an amending rule or regulation. These MLAs can be from the same community designation, so they can, in theory and in practice, come from two unionist parties or indeed two nationalist parties. The exercise of the break will require no other process and no vote in the Assembly. Once the break has been pulled, the law will automatically be disapplied in Northern Ireland after 2 weeks. The EU could only challenge the use of the break through international arbitration after the law had been suspended, where the bar to overturn it would be exceptionally high. The Stormont, in a moment, if I may. The Stormont break is one of the most significant changes that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has secured. It is a robust change that gives the United Kingdom a veto over dynamic alignment with EU rules. But just as importantly, Mr. Speaker, the regulations we are debating today put the democratically elected representatives of the people of Northern Ireland in the driving seat when it comes to whether and when that veto will be used. I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Could he answer very clearly this one simple question? Isn't it the case that every single vehicle, a lorry vehicle, that will depart the port of Carnryan to Northern Ireland will have to have customs declaration papers for every product on that vehicle? And is it right that one vehicle travelling from one part of the United Kingdom to another part of the United Kingdom continues to be treated in that way?
Those vehicles will be using the Trusted Trader service. 21 fields of information, mostly auto-populated, which would mean no certificates needed from vets or from any third parties. I think the honourable gentleman, I'm afraid it is, I think I'm right, to the honourable gentleman. I'll happily give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. When he appeared before the European Scrutiny Committee yesterday, my right honourable friend promised to deliver the list of the 3% of the EU laws he says will remain as a consequence of this process. Can you please tell us where that list is?
And I did give that the majority of that list in the course of that protocol, and I did say I would write to the honourable gentleman, which I will do. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the old protocol did have some measures that were aimed at giving it democratic legitimacy. The UK did have a vote over any new laws that the EU wanted to add to the protocol, but that veto did not extend to amendments of laws that were already there. And crucially, there was no role for the Northern Ireland Assembly in deciding whether and when to use that veto. And of course, it contained the democratic consent mechanism, an important means of giving the Assembly the right to end the application of Articles 5 to 10 of the old protocol. Those measures were important, and the Windsor Framework maintains them, but they were not, in themselves, enough to address the democratic deficit.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
I'll happily give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and I wonder if you can just clarify something for me. He's spoken about the Green Channel for goods movements from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Is it the case, and this is a genuine question, as I understand it, the Northern Ireland economy produces about £77 billion worth of goods, of which £65 billion go to the rest of Great Britain. Is it not the case, though, that everything manufactured in Northern Ireland would have to meet EU standards, even if it's going to the rest of the UK?
Yes. We're perfectly clear that we are maintaining, it's basically 3% of EU law in Northern Ireland, which is the bare minimum to maintain Northern Ireland's access to the single market, which just about every business I've spoken to in Northern Ireland and has made representations is delighted to be maintaining. And indeed, I've been lobbied by individual members around from Northern Ireland to actually have this maintenance of access to both the UK market, the fifth largest economy in the world, and indeed the EU market for goods. I'll happily give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and I fully support what he's done here. I think the Prime Minister and the whole of the Northern Ireland team have done a great job. And does he agree with me that this Windsor Agreement enables a huge opportunity in Northern Ireland, not just to be a precious part of our United Kingdom, but also to be the target of enormous amounts of foreign direct investment coming into Northern Ireland, because it will have the advantage of being an integral part of the United Kingdom, but having open access to EU markets as well.
And in that, and by maintaining that 3% of EU law, she helps answer the question that my right honourable friend for Lichfield posed. As I say, there will be a binding statutory obligation in domestic law on ministers to pull the brake when a valid notification is provided by 30 MLAs. And actually, just to address these regulations will add a new democratic scrutiny schedule to the Northern Ireland Act 1998 to codify this break in domestic law. The UK government must, let me repeat that, Mr. Speaker, must notify the EU when a valid notification of the break has been provided by MLAs. This is an important new function for members of the Assembly. It's vital they exercise this new function with the right information and expertise. After consulting with Northern Ireland parties, these regulations provide for a standing committee of the Assembly to properly scrutinise the relevant rules. Mr. Speaker, I'll happily take it.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State giving way, and can I say I'm treating this vote today as a recognition of the wider package and voting for it with the government. On the issue of the Democratic Scrutiny Committee, this is new to the Assembly. It will require a lot of resources, as will the necessity of engaging with Brussels in terms of the development of new law from first principles. Will the Secretary of State have a conversation with the Assembly around the potential for new resources to make sure it can actually do its job fully in that regard?
I very much look forward to having that conversation with a fully functioning Assembly and Executive. Mr. Speaker, some have described this as a consultative role for MLAs. It is not. It's a robust power for MLAs to stop the application of amended EU rules, a power that neither the UK government nor the European Union can override, provided the conditions in the framework are met. Some have claimed, I'm going to keep going for a bit if I may please, some have claimed that the EU must have some means of blocking the break. These regulations demonstrate, Mr. Speaker, that this process is entirely one for the United Kingdom. The process is firmly and unambiguously within Strand 1 of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. There is no role for any institutions outside the United Kingdom, whether that be the EU or anyone else, to determine whether the brake is pulled. It will be a choice of the UK alone, its sovereign government alongside elected MLAs, whether the brake is pulled. Some also claim, Mr. Speaker, that the government might simply ignore the brake. These regulations make clear that the government has no discretion here. MLAs cannot be ignored. Valid notifications of the brake must be notified to the European Union. The government's actions the government's actions will be subject to all the normal public law principles that attach to decision making. And for the avoidance of doubt, the regulations are clear that the prospect of any remedial measures by the EU cannot be a relevant factor in the government's determination. Why not? Mr. Speaker, it is not enough to simply allow MLAs to temporarily halt the application of a rule, but then allow the United Kingdom government to simply override them when the Joint Committee decides whether the rule should be permanently disapplied. So these regulations go much further and provide a clear, robust directive role to determine whether the government should use its veto or not. Unless there is cross-community support in the Assembly, ministers will be legally prohibited from accepting an amended or new EU law which creates a regulatory border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, except in exceptional circumstances. And let me be clear, exceptional circumstances means just that. The threshold for that exception is unbelievably high, and a minister invoking exceptional circumstances must be able to defend that decision robustly and in line with normal public law principles. And what's more, a minister must account to Parliament where they have concluded that exceptional circumstances apply or where they consider that a measure would not create a regulatory border. This represents one of the strongest statutory constraints on the exercise of ministerial functions under a treaty ever codified in our domestic law. I hope you give way.
Thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Would you just confirm to the House, if there is no Stormont, will there be a Stormont break?
If there is, this break cannot even start to be a thing until Stormont goes back and the executive functions. I'm happy to give way to him. Sorry.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Thank him for setting out the way this break will operate. Would he join me in urging those considering these proposals before the House today to note that this is something that for many years people said was impossible, an application to stop the ratchet of EU law and to keep Northern Ireland in the Union?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. I was told this would be an impossible ask as well. And throughout my time in the European Parliament, and indeed as chairman of an illustrious body of MPs in this place, I never thought this would be achievable, and yet this government has managed to achieve it. Finally, Mr. Speaker, as with any international agreement, if the EU has considered actually, before I go there, Mr. Speaker, these regulations could scarcely make things clearer. The overwhelming presumption is that unless the Assembly says yes, the government must say no. Finally, Mr. Speaker, and as with any international agreement, if the EU considers that the UK has improperly pulled the brake, it may choose to initiate a dispute. But we need to be clear that any dispute could only arise after the rules have been disapplied in Northern Ireland, and the resolution of that dispute would be for an arbitration panel. The European Court of Justice would have no role in resolving that dispute. Mr. Speaker, these regulations make the case for the functioning devolved institutions in Northern Ireland even more compelling. These measures will become operable only when the institutions are restored. Denying the people of Northern Ireland will not only deny them the basic right to an effective, stable government, but will also deny them the full democratic input into the laws that apply to Northern Ireland, and that denial cannot be justified. Mr. Speaker, these regulations give domestic legal effect to this democratic safeguard and restore the UK's sovereignty. We should consider carefully how we vote on this measure. Without this measure, Northern Ireland would continue to have full and automatic dynamic alignment with EU goods rules, with no say for the Northern Ireland Assembly and no veto on amending or replacing those measures. That is an intolerable situation, Mr. Speaker, and I urge all honourable and right honourable members to vote to end that full and automatic dynamic alignment. I therefore commend this order to the House and beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, I now call the Shadow Secretary of State, Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, the leader of my party, said in January that any protocol deal struck between the UK government and the EU would by definition mean real progress in mitigating the problems caused by the original deal that they negotiated. He pledged that in these circumstances Labour would support such a deal. It is a pledge that we will be honouring today. So whereas the government has once again been distracted by rebellion and infighting within their own party, thanks to the Labour Party they can be sure that the national interests will be served today. Of course I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way because he actually makes a very important point here. For the last quarter century, the House has proceeded in relation to the peace process in Northern Ireland, and today is about the peace process. Let's be quite clear about that, on the basis of bipartisan or non-partisan politics. For that reason, my party will also be joining him and the government in the lobbies tonight.
I'm grateful for the Right Honourable Gentleman's intervention and taking a similar position and coming to a similar view as the Labour Party. As a Scottish MP, I also want to express my sympathies with the incident which is unfolding in Edinburgh with a ship which is capsized and is injuring, we believe, 15 or more people. So our sympathies are with him and the people of Scotland today. The government has said that the vote today is the main vote on the Windsor Framework. It's the main vote that this House will get. My speech will focus on why Labour supports the deal overall, but I will also begin on the Stormont break itself, which is the subject of the regulations that this SI puts in place today. The democratic deficit was always one of the hardest parts of the protocol deal to reconcile. Of course, businesses and most people in Northern Ireland want to continue access to the European market as well as the internal market. But the cost of this access was having no say in the rules which had to be followed. The Stormont break will give representatives a say once devolved government is restored. It is impossible to argue that this is not an improvement on the current situation. 30 MLAs from two parties will be able to trigger the break. But I think just as important is the new committee in the Assembly that will scrutinise new laws and which will affect Northern Ireland. There are understandable concerns about how the break will work in practice, but the best way of stress testing this can only be done through experience, and you can only get the experience by restoring Stormont. Getting Northern Ireland's devolved government back up and running is what we all want to see. I know also it's what the DUP members want to see too. I want to state the obvious before going further. The economy in Northern Ireland has huge potential. The economy in Northern Ireland is doing well. The Prime Minister rather eloquently explained why during his last visit to Northern Ireland. He didn't need to, because everyone who lives there or runs a business already knows. But the challenges posed by the protocol go much deeper than the market access, and that's what needs most attention during this torturous period of renegotiation. And I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I think he was right to acknowledge that there were legitimate concerns that unionism had around the operation of the protocol. Would he agree with me, though, that anyone looking at this objectively would say that those have been addressed both by the EU and the UK government? But further to that, the fundamental point is that businesses in St Helens would give their right arms to have the opportunities that Northern Ireland has: logistics, medical, manufacturing and agriculture, to have access to those two markets.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend's intervention. I'm also pleased that he recognised the legitimate concerns that the DUP have. But yes, I think all of us right across the United Kingdom want to see devolved administration in Northern Ireland up and running. That's what the purpose of this whole torturous process has been, and hopefully we can get resolved soon. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman for vote.
So what is the point of rushing through a vote on this protocol when it is the protocol and the agreement behind it that prevents Stormont meeting, which means the protocol would never be used?
Well, he makes the argument for why you should have voted against the protocol in the first place. Yeah. We on this side did oppose the protocol when it was imposed. He voted for it. Now, there are lots of people on that side, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I listen to with great interest because they often contribute a lot of thoughtful insight into the way we debate. But let's just reflect on what the Right Honourable Member for Wokingham said in the run-up to the Brexit referendum. The promises that he made to this country. This all came from his website because I read it with great interest. 1, there will be more growth in the economy. 2, it'll rebuild our fisheries. 3, food will be cheaper. 4, our power will be cheaper. We will have fewer unhelpful regulations. Well, if that's the case, we wouldn't be here debating this today, would we? 6, we will get a US trade deal. And 7, our balance of payments will improve. There are many people who should be contributing to this debate in a thoughtful way. He, I'm afraid, is not one of them. The challenges posed by the protocol go much deeper than market access. And that's what's needed most attention during this tortuous process of renegotiation. The Unionist concerns were mostly twofold. Firstly, there were impediments to the flow of goods travelling across the Irish Sea. Some products and shipments were more affected than others, having a disruptive effect on supply chains and the ability of retailers to keep their stores stocked in a manner familiar to pre-protocol shoppers. This, of course, leads to the second source of concern, which is the existential impact that these impediments have to the free flow of goods within the United Kingdom and what that poses for unionism. I give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that the Government has made tremendous progress with this Windsor Framework in terms of veterinary and sanitary and phytosanitary measures? And what has been achieved with the securing of human medicines long-term and the direction of travel for securing veterinary medicines up until the grace period ends shows that what can be achieved through dialogue. And it really shows to us all that we should be strongly supporting this framework deal.
It does indeed show that negotiating and talking rather than rowing delivers more, but it also shows that you should think very carefully about what you vote for in the first place. Yeah. It is a right enshrined in treaty that anyone in Northern Ireland who wants to associate themselves as British should be able to do so without impediment. I understand this. Of course I do. If produce made in Sussex faced checks on the border with Hampshire, I would have something to say about it. And I've also asked myself this: if the protocol checks were taking place between Ireland and Northern Ireland instead of the Irish Sea, would nationalist communities be demanding action today? I believe they would. So demand for action is warranted. It is based on real concerns, not confected ones. So the mystery to me has always been why the government took so long to act. Why wait until devolved authorities had collapsed before seeming to care? By the time I was appointed to this job, the DUP had been voicing concerns about the protocol for well over 6 months. They were ignored. A month before I was appointed, the Right Honourable Member for the Lagan Valley had published an article calling for Article 16 to be triggered. It was met with silence. Then, in February, the executive was collapsed, followed 4 months later by the Assembly. In all that time, there was no visits by the Prime Minister, no meetings with party leaders either in Northern Ireland or in Downing Street, not a single statement to this House. As a result of this neglect, and believe me, it is neglect, we are now faced with 2 problems. The first is solving the technical issues created as a direct result of the original protocol negotiated by that government and voted for by every single person sitting on those benches. That protocol, I remind the House, was created, negotiated and hailed as a great deal for Britain by this government at the time. And lest we forget, it was voted for by every single member on those benches, including those affiliated by to the ERG faction. Secondly, that period of neglect created a political problem that this government is paying the price for right here today. Put simply, when the DUP were expressing their concerns over the protocol from within the devolved institutions, they were ignored by the government in Westminster. When they collapsed those institutions, they were rewarded with a prime ministerial visit and ultimately the renegotiation of the protocol. The message from government couldn't be clearer. The learned behaviour of dealing with this government is that if you act functionally within the devolved administration, you are ignored. Of course, but if you act outside of the administration, you are unignorable. Of course, in this period, the other Northern Ireland parties have been denied their place within the government as well, through no fault of their own. In just one moment. So, if you disrupt and act outside of the structures of government, you get all the attention in the world. You even get a Prime Minister travelling abroad on your behalf to renegotiate a deal we'd hitherto been told was unrenegotiable. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman from Stansted.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. It's not only neglect or ignorance. Does the Shadow Minister recognise that Tony Blair, the former leader of the Labour Party, said you can't move forward without unionist participation in this process, in this agreement, this framework? Bertie Ahern, also a former an instrument in the peace process, also said you can't ignore unionism. Does the Shadow Minister agree when it comes to moving forward, unionism cannot be ignored and our point of view has to be core to the whole issue of how we find a process to go forward?
I'm very grateful for his intervention, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have the exchange between us. And it gives me the opportunity to say that I can only speak for the Labour Party. I can speak for myself as the Shadow Secretary of State, and that is that his party and no party in Northern Ireland will ever be ignored by this party or a future Labour government. But also, as I'm about to explain, that you will be most rewarded and you will have most attention and have most agency in political life right across the United Kingdom from a position within the devolved authorities. So I do understand his point. Tony Blair and others were right, but these are all leaders who gave the attention to the DUP and every other party at the point at which they needed it. They didn't wait until devolution had collapsed before paying you and them and their parties the respect that they are owed and due. I will give way.
Mr. Speaker, to give the Shadow Minister some credit, he is excellent at articulating the problem. But what's his solution?
I'm very grateful because we'll be getting to it. And of course, he also well, it's interesting that members there want me to speed up, but they keep intervening. So I'll get through the speech if you allow me to get to it. But he makes the most blindingly obvious point here. My party will be voting in unanimity today. It is his party that is getting in the way of getting this across the line, because it is his party that is split over how to vote on the issue before us today. We're acting in the national interest. They are riven with division. So people like me aspire to government because we want to deliver positive change. But the DUP now have to ask themselves, because of the way they've been treated by this government, would a return to government mean relinquishing power? This inversion of the very principle of government, this absurdity, is a direct consequence of the manner in which Northern Ireland has been treated by this government and subsequent Conservative administrations over the last 13 years. And I want to be clear to members who represent communities in Northern Ireland in what they can expect from a future Labour government, to answer the point of the last intervention. So let me reassure them that we haven't forgotten the lessons of 25 years ago and the tough years following the peace deal. To me, those lessons are, first, that leadership matters. Tony Blair's first visit outside of London as Prime Minister was to Belfast. He visited 5 times in his first year as Premier. He didn't neglect Northern Ireland, and nor will my right honourable friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras. Second, work towards a strong, trusting relationship with the Irish government. Because when our two countries work together closely, it eases the anxiety that some people in Northern Ireland feel regarding their Irish or British identities, as well as creating the conditions for economic progress across the island of Ireland. Third, we need to have the same ambition for Northern Ireland as we do for every other part of our union. I give way.
the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I note what he's saying, and he's absolutely right. The agreement 25 years ago would not have been possible without the sacrifices and the statesmanship of so many others. But would he acknowledge that actually it was John Major and his government that started that process, and that this isn't a party political matter, this is something that this House should be proud of?
Firstly, I thank her for her time as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland as well. And I readily acknowledge that many, many people made peace possible in Northern Ireland 25 years ago. We in this House will have the opportunity to debate these issues in a general debate coming up. And there will be plenty of opportunity over in Belfast as dignitaries from across the world come in to celebrate the great achievement of that time. John Major, of course, laid the foundations, and I think at the time and subsequently, all Labour leaders, including Tony Blair at the time, paid great respect to the contribution that he made. If I start listing the names of everyone, then we'll be here for a very long time indeed. Third, we need to have the same ambition for Northern Ireland as we do for every other part of the Union. For example, it is not good enough to roll out home heating support months after citizens in every other part of the UK have received their support. Fourth, we should aspire to build respect among communities and be a voice for all communities here in Westminster. The last Labour government positioned the UK as an honest broker for all of Northern Ireland, and so will the next. And finally, Mr. Speaker, Labour will never give up on Northern Ireland, however insurmountable the challenges might seem. Those involved in the negotiations 25 years ago have plenty of stories of frustration and moments of hopelessness. But perseverance is rewarded. It was then and it will be again today and into the future. It always is in Northern Ireland. While this deal is not perfect, it is an improvement. So, the interests of Northern Ireland and the rest of our country, we will be voting for it today. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. As you can see, there's a great deal of interest in this debate, so can I please ask people, when they do make their contributions, to make it short, please, so as many people can get in. Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I welcome the debate and the vote today, and the Windsor Framework has my full support. I also welcome the fact that the Labour Party, Lib Dem Party and almost the SNP, I think, are supporting the government and the Conservative Party today. Those of us who have followed this issue closely probably never expected to be here debating a renegotiation of the treaty itself. And it's testament to the Prime Minister's determination and that of the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary and others, that this focus, and through this focus, they've been able to achieve that. As someone also who's been slightly traumatised by Brexit votes over the years, I'm also delighted that this is the end chapter. And notwithstanding further improvements and changes, I think this chapter is one we're probably all delighted to be ending.
Notwithstanding what the Right Honourable Gentleman said, may I suggest that still this remains unfinished business as regards our leading the European Union?
Some people are never finished.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, some things never change, but I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for his focus and continued monomaniacal focus on this issue. I want to also acknowledge the work done by honourable members in Northern Ireland. Although we'll be in different division lobbies today, I believe, the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley spoke powerfully about the democratic deficit and the need for cross-community safeguards, which are now at the heart of the Stormont break. As one of Michel Barnier's top advisers said, as the Secretary of State has just told us, there has actually been a big victory for the Democratic Unionist Party. The Honourable Member for Upper Barn worked harder than anybody else to finally fix the issue of seed potatoes for her farming constituents, and the Honourable Members for North Down, Foyle and South Belfast have all engaged closely with businesses, Northern Ireland enterprises, to find practical solutions. I believe that the huge progress has been achieved, and we now need to maximise the potential for Northern Ireland to become one of the most attractive places to invest in the UK. I want to finish briefly by talking about the Union. The greatest strength we have in securing Northern Ireland's place in the Union is the majority of people in Northern Ireland who support it. We must cherish, nurture and expand that support and consent at every opportunity. Recent polling has shown there is huge support across Northern Ireland, above 70%, for the Windsor Framework and for solving this issue, and particularly cross-community support for the access it provides to both the UK and EU markets. I believe if we can bank the wins in this deal and secure over time stable power sharing, then we can look forward to decades and decades of overwhelming support for Northern Ireland remaining an integral part of the United Kingdom.
And that was a 3-minute contribution from a former Secretary of State, so I'm sure if we can all follow that, we'll get a lot of people in. Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Perhaps I should begin by addressing the remarks made just there by the Right Honourable Member for Skipton and Ripon when he said that he thought the SNP was almost ready to support this. I can say to him he's almost right, because we will in fact be supporting this agreement. We welcome it and we will be voting in favour this evening. Certainly the mechanism as set out in the SI provides what looks at first glance like a reasonably effective means of scrutiny with instalment, although I do have to say that in terms of its function as a brake, it's perhaps questionable whether or not that brake lever is actually connected to anything, and only time will tell. So, in terms of the good aspects, we welcome that at long last the UK Government has engaged constructively over a prolonged period with EU partners to come to an agreement which improves the protocol. We welcome that the protocol bill has been left abandoned as it always should have been, averting the prospect of a catastrophic series of tit-for-tat trade reactions over the protocol, which would have been disastrous for all parts of the UK. And the task now is for ministers to start repairing some of the damage that's been caused in the intervening period. Now, from our perspective in Scotland, this while it certainly restores access for Scottish producers to the Northern Irish market, it still leaves us deprived of equivalent access to the European single market. So in that respect, it's not my natural disposition to be a party pooper in any way, as I'm sure the House would agree, but this only serves to make an already poor situation slightly less bad. And there are a number of questions that still need to be asked about how the UK Government will continue to try and improve trade conditions for other devolved nations in the UK, whether the Government can provide clarity over how the Port of Cairn-Ryan will operate and what infrastructure is needed, whether cows and sheep being transported between Northern Ireland and Scotland can qualify for the Green Lane, and how the UK Government is in more broad terms going to tackle the food security crisis that affects us all. Now, occasionally in politics you'll get you're blessed with a rare flash of candour. We had one in the budget speech last week when the Chancellor said to great acclaim from these benches that independence is always better than dependence. But we also had it from the Prime Minister when he went across to Northern Ireland to sell, as he saw, the benefits of this deal. Now, I don't know if the Prime Minister thought that just because he was saying it in Northern Ireland that nobody would be able to hear what it was over on Great Britain, and particularly in Scotland, what he had to say, but he described Northern Ireland under this this framework as would be the world's most exciting economic zone because of access to both GB and EU markets. He also went on to say that this very special position made Northern Ireland an incredibly attractive place to invest. In fact, it was no less than the world's most exciting economic zone. And just to make sure that he doesn't feel left out, the Right Honourable Member for High Wycombe also said, what an extraordinary opportunity for Northern Ireland, dual access to both markets. Well, of course, this very special position is precisely what the entirety of the UK had prior to Brexit. Now, I certainly, Mr Deputy Speaker, do not grudge one iota those benefits for Northern Ireland. I just wonder why members opposite, whatever view they take on this, have been so utterly determined to deprive those benefits to the rest of us.
William Cash. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I believe in the real union of the United Kingdom and the sovereignty of its Parliament here at Westminster. Article 1 and 2 of the Protocol clearly state the principle of consent for Westminster, and the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom is fundamental Consent and veto are different things. We have left the EU and we have passed Section 38, the guarantee of the sovereignty of the United Kingdom Parliament, and yet all laws passed before we left in relation to the single market still apply to and subjugate the people of Northern Ireland to the EU, but not to the rest of the UK. There is no such thing as Northern Ireland sovereignty. There is only constitutional Westminster sovereignty, and I'm afraid I do not recognise the expression practical sovereignty used by the Secretary of State in this debate and in a letter he wrote to the Joint Committee Chairman on statutory instruments of the 20th of March. Why should 2 million Northern Ireland citizens and voters for Westminster be treated differently from, say, the 2 million people from Birmingham, Liverpool or Manchester? Of course.
The Honourable Gentleman is making a powerful speech, and obviously he's a subject matter expert, and I know he has passionate views on this. But listening to him, the phrase that comes to mind is a German one, I'm afraid. It's pathological Realitätsverweigerung. It means a pathological denial of reality. The simple fact is that the lived reality in Birmingham and Manchester is entirely different. We aren't against another national border. We don't need to have some form of alignment with a neighbour for the free movement of goods and services. There's not a situation where there's, for example, I think it's only a single milk processing plant on the island of Ireland. There has to be some sort of practical recognition of the difficulties and the lived reality.
Well, unfortunately, the heading of the statutory instrument we're discussing in this motion today says constitutional law. And I'm very sorry to have to say that what the Honourable Gentleman said, and some references to pathological something or other, I'm afraid makes absolutely no sense in relation to constitutional law, which is that we in this country operate a rule of law and a constitutional law which confers the sovereignty to Westminster Parliament, which includes the people of Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool and Northern Ireland, and should do so equally. So since Brexit, Mr Deputy Speaker, over 640 laws, which we see each week in the European Scrutiny Committee, which I chair, have been passed already for Northern Ireland by the EU Council of Ministers behind closed doors in Brussels by majority vote without even a transcript. Can we imagine laws being passed in this country, in Westminster, without Hansard, without a transcript, and by majority vote? It's unthinkable. Of course I can.
Very, very grateful for the Honourable Member for giving way. Of course, I think, if memory serves me right, he did vote for the protocol that didn't have a stormont break and had far more checks in it. Could he explain why he's voting against this?
Well, very simply, because we agreed that we were going to bring in the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. I'll come on to that in a minute. That is the difference. That's what would have dealt with the situation. So we in the rest of the UK have left the EU and have been subjected to our own laws, not those of the EU, for the past as they were for the last 50 years. This, as I've said to the Right Honourable Gentleman, it remains unfinished business. Pre-Brexit single market legislation continues in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Protocol Bill dealt with the unacceptable imposition of EU laws, but this bill is now being disposed of to my very grave concern, although it was passed in this House by a majority of 72 on third reading. And most of, I'm going to say, of honourable members who are here today, on our side of the House anyway, voted for it. The Windsor Framework does not effectively disapply EU law as such in, for example, the customs regime, because this falls within the legal competence of the EU relating to goods. Indeed, if the UK purports to use its so-called veto in relation to this question of the Stormont break, the EU will be able to get round this sooner or later in respect to the green lanes and may invoke retaliatory measures. I'm afraid I'm not impressed by the expression exceptional circumstances. Words mean what you choose them to mean, said Humpty Dumpty. The question is who is to be master, that is all. And I believe firmly that that will be the European Union. In fact, one of my sadnesses about this whole business here today is that there really was a need for proper time to discuss, in consultation with the government, alternative legal arguments. there are papers that have been produced in the last 48 hours and over the last few weeks. There are blogs, there are commentaries by distinguished lawyers which quite clearly demonstrate that the arguments that are presented by the government are not those which are agreed by other eminent lawyers. And that's a point of law as well as a point of fact. And as to the question of democratic consent and the inadequacy of the Stormont break, I'm sure that this will be addressed by the DUP members today. This is as important to all of us as the main principle of the Union. The procedures have been rushed, and I simply cannot accept that it is right for a statutory instrument to be approved in this House today when there is not yet a legal decision in the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee until Friday, so we hear. Furthermore, I now hear that the House of Lords itself, which is part of the Joint Committee, is not going to consider this statutory instrument until Wednesday the 29th of March, which is after the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee sits. So the government, in seeking approval of this statutory instrument today, is not doing it in synchronisation with the House of Lords, and I find this manifestly unsatisfactory. I am deeply concerned, too, that these procedures are not following the criteria of Standing Order 151 of the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments. And I do think that the chairman, if I may say with great respect, that the chairman of the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments, who is a member of this House for Morden, should really be here today to explain their position. I was surprised to see a letter from the Secretary of State to the chairman of that Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments, dated 20th of March, in which the Secretary of State, I certainly will.
I'd like to thank him for giving way. As one of the few members of this House who was born and raised in Northern Ireland, can I make it very clear that this is not about his correspondence, but about the future of the people of Northern Ireland, the vast majority of whom support the Windsor Framework. The business community support the Windsor Framework. They believe that this is a much better deal negotiated by the Prime Minister than they ever thought possible. The people of Northern Ireland, and indeed the people of the UK, need to move on and focus on more important things. Thank you.
Minutes now, and this is really very time limited. The debate has to finish at 21 minutes past 2.
I'm just about to conclude by saying that this is about the rule of law and is about constitutional law, as well as the very fair points that the Honourable Lady has just made. I don't doubt the importance to the stability of Northern Ireland. I've taken a great interest in these matters for many, many years, but I will insist that the constitutional position is not reflected by the arrangements in this Windsor Agreement. And I would simply make this as a final point. The proof of the pudding, Mr Deputy Speaker, will be in the eating.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I will try to be brief, but you will appreciate that there is a lot we would like to say today in very limited time. And these regulations which we are debating today, known to many as the Stormont Break, but they do touch on many very important legal and political matters. And can I at the outset thank the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State and others for their continued engagement with my party, for the efforts that they have made, and though at this stage we may differ on our views in relation to the Windsor Framework, I'm not here to question the motivation of ministers in seeking to make improvements, but they must, and I hope will, continue to work with us and others to get the further improvements that we need to enable the restoration of devolved government in Northern Ireland. And to be clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to see the restoration of devolved government in Northern Ireland. My party is a party of devolution. We believe that delivering effective government for our people is the best way forward, working alongside this House and this Parliament. And that is where we want to get to. But we've got to get it right. And I echo the comments of the Honourable Member for Stone about the rush to bring this statutory instrument forward. I have written to the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments expressing my concern that we haven't had adequate time for scrutiny of this statutory instrument. But today the government has indicated that we're not just dealing with the SI before us, but this today is also an indicative vote on the Windsor Framework itself. And therefore it's important that in my comments I reflect not just on what the Stormont Break does, but where it fits in to that wider Windsor Framework. Fundamentally for us, Mr Deputy Speaker, the problem with the Northern Ireland Protocol is the continued application of EU law in Northern Ireland in circumstances where it covers all manufacturing of goods in Northern Ireland, regardless of whether those goods are being sold in the United Kingdom or sold to the European Union. And I repeat the statistics that I quoted earlier at Northern Ireland Questions. Of all goods manufactured in Northern Ireland, the vast majority of them, some £65 billion worth of goods out of 77 billion manufactured, are sold in the United Kingdom. And therefore the solution must be proportionate to the difficulty. And the difficulty is the EU's desire to protect its single market and to maintain an open border on the island of Ireland. But the price for that, Mr Deputy Speaker, cannot be that Northern Ireland businesses manufacturing goods for sale in the United Kingdom are inhibited in many ways from trading within their own market. And so I say to the Secretary of State that in relation to the Windsor Framework, whilst undoubtedly improvements have been made, we have not yet fully addressed this fundamental problem, which is the continued application of EU law for the manufacturing of all goods in Northern Ireland. And we believe the real solution here is similar to that which was proposed in the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which is that where goods are being sold in the United Kingdom, staying in the United Kingdom law and standards apply. And where goods are being manufactured by Northern Ireland businesses for sale in the Republic of Ireland or any other EU member state, EU rules apply. And that's the solution we're looking for. And the Windsor Framework does not deliver that solution. I will give way to the...
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree that on the point he's made, or any other improvements or changes that needs to be made, the best way to influence now is for Stormont to return and for Stormont to be the centre of what I'm sure will be ongoing improves and iterations in this area?
6 months to improve that.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman, the former Secretary of State, for his continued interest in Northern Ireland. And I say to him simply this, that my ministers in the Democratic Unionist Party sat in Stormont for over a year after the protocol was implemented. And we pleaded with the government, as the right honourable member, the opposition spokesperson, reminded the House today. We pleaded with the government to intervene, to do something to help us with the difficulties that the protocol was creating, and the government did not act. And I had to take action, and it was our action that brought the EU back to the table. And yes, we have made progress as a result of that, but more is needed. What is the more that is needed? It is to deliver the pledge given by the government in the New Decade New Approach Agreement to protect Northern Ireland's place within the internal market of the United Kingdom. And whilst the Windsor Framework goes some way to doing that in relation to the movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, it does not deal, for example, with the real potential for divergence between laws that apply in Northern Ireland, EU laws, and laws that apply in Great Britain, UK laws, where the UK decides to change regulations that were formerly EU regulations. And there is a bill before this House that will fast-track and significantly broaden the number of UK laws that are going to be changed and where EU law is disapplied, and that creates the potential for divergence between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. It harms our ability to trade with Great Britain, it harms the integrity of the internal market of the United Kingdom, and the Windsor Framework doesn't address that problem, and we need it addressed. So I say to the right honourable member, I want to see Stormont up and running, but we need the government to deliver the commitment it made when he was the Secretary of State to protect our place in the internal market of the United Kingdom. I give way.
Very grateful. And would you also agree that because the EU will have powers over things like VAT and state aids in Northern Ireland, it will also have powers on a drag-through basis over the whole United Kingdom, And doesn't the whole United Kingdom need a veto?
Well, I agree with the right honourable gentleman, and I say that that is why we need a solution that enables the United Kingdom government and this Parliament to regulate the entirety of the United Kingdom internal market. That is the solution. I am not saying that where Northern Ireland businesses trade with the EU standards and rules should not apply. I'm saying we can allow for that. But what I am not accepting is a situation where every business in my constituency must comply with EU rules, even if they don't sell a single widget to the European Union. And that is wrong, because it harms our place in the internal market of the United Kingdom. The Stormont Break seeks to address the democratic deficit that I have mentioned, and to an extent it provides a role for Stormont to pull that break when changes to EU law are occurring. But note, it does not give us any ability to deal with existing EU law that impacts on all manufacturing in Northern Ireland, laws that have been applied without our consent. And therefore, to that extent, the break cannot apply. It applies to amendments or to EU law or changes, new EU laws that are introduced. And I also note, Mr Deputy Speaker, that in the proposed arrangements, it is available to the EU to take retaliatory action in the event that the UK government applies a veto to a new EU law. Now, this is a matter of concern to us in Northern Ireland, because retaliatory action could come in a number of forms and could include the suspension of arrangements in the Green Lane, which would impact our ability to bring goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So we need to be clear that it is wrong for the EU to be able to intervene at that level in the free flow of goods from one part of the United Kingdom to the other. And so I highlight that issue as a real matter of concern to us.
Just before you take this intervention, Sir Jeffrey, there is now 9 minutes, and also when you resume your seat, I'm introducing a 3-minute time limit to get as many people in, so please be cognizant of that.
I'm very grateful, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend will know of the exchange the Secretary of State and I had yesterday at the European Scrutiny Committee, and the invitation given to him to indicate that in Article 18 of the Stormont Break, exceptional circumstances would preclude a material consideration being the EU retaliatory action that he has so referred. The Secretary of State was quick yesterday to agree with the interpretation. Can I ask, through my right honourable friend, that the Secretary of State at least will consider reaffirming the commitment that he was given yesterday? It features in Article 14, it does not feature in Article 16, but just to be clear, retaliatory action would not allow, the threat of retaliatory action would not allow a Secretary of State to consider that as an exceptional circumstances when exercising a veto.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I welcomed what the Secretary of State said yesterday, that we must not allow the threat of EU retaliatory action to influence ministers in exercising their powers under the Stormont Break. I also welcome the clear commitment that the Prime Minister gave to me recently, that the application of this power, the Stormont Break, is entirely a matter for the United Kingdom. It is a Strand 1 issue under the terms of the Belfast Agreement, and does not involve a role for the Irish Government in relation to these matters, and that's a very important principle for us. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has also indicated to me that in this process the wishes of Stormont will be respected. But I have made clear that in exercising the Stormont Break, we are simply applying, in our terms, the possibility, the potential of a veto by the United Kingdom government on one aspect of EU law. This does not deal with all of the problem, and that's the difficulty that we have. The continued application of EU law in Northern Ireland is what creates the problem for us in our ability to trade within the internal market of the United Kingdom. As I come to a conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think it is important that the Government of the United Kingdom takes stock of where we are now. I understand that the Foreign Secretary is going to the joint committee of the UK-EU Joint Committee on Friday to sign off on the Windsor Framework, and that the indicative vote taken today in this House will be used as justification for doing so. But can I say to the Secretary of State, surely our shared objective here, as was espoused by the former Secretary of State earlier, is to see the political institutions in Northern Ireland restored.
Do it then.
And therefore, we need to continue engaging with the government to get this right. My party is committed to doing that. We are committed to continue working with the Secretary of State, working with the Prime Minister, and that has to be about delivering on the commitment given to protect Northern Ireland's place within the internal market of the United Kingdom. That where EU law is applied to facilitate cross-border trade, that it does not impede our ability to trade with the rest of our own country within the internal market of our own country. That is the bottom line for us. And until that is resolved, I can't commit to the government that we will restore the political institutions. It's what I want to do, but we need to get this right. I want Stormont restored on a sustainable basis, on a stable basis, where there is cross-community consent and consensus. That does not exist at the moment. And therefore, we need to see that consensus restored, Mr. Deputy Speaker. For our part, we will continue to work intensively to solve these issues, doing so in the knowledge that what has already been achieved has been because we were not prepared to accept the undermining of Northern Ireland's place within the Union of the United Kingdom, the economic union of the United Kingdom. That's what we stand for. That's what we will fight for. We want to get it right. We will work with the government to do that.
3-minute limit. Karen Bradley.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, will know that I rarely rise to speak in debates that he leads, not because I disagree with what he's doing, but I think it's important that predecessors do not comment too often on their successors' work. I know how hard the job of Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is, but I rise to stand today because I support wholeheartedly what he has achieved together with the Prime Minister, and I want to see this statutory instrument go through with an overwhelming majority of this House today. 2 weeks ago, the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, which I co-chair, met in Belfast to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We met in the currently empty Assembly chamber of Stormont. We met with representatives from legislatures across the islands that make up the British Isles, and we reflected on the leadership that had been required in order to deliver that deal 25 years ago. Leadership that didn't take just a few weeks, leadership that took years and years, people making sacrifices, going above and beyond and being prepared to recognise that no deal is perfect. But the combination of getting to the result of that Belfast Good Friday Agreement for the people of Northern Ireland and the people across these islands was so significant that that sacrifice was worth making. Of course I give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Does she also agree that another great virtue of this agreement, which is much to be commended, is it enables us to resolve those issues in a way which does not lead us into breach of any of our international law obligations, as would have been the case had we proceeded with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill? That has got to be a win for the UK's reputation as well as for the people of Northern Ireland.
I agree wholeheartedly with my honourable friend. He speaks with great wisdom, as he always does. One of the things that was clear to me when I was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and did the job that he now does is that leaving the European Union without a deal would have been devastating for Northern Ireland. It would have been devastating economically and it would have been devastating for community cohesion. And that was why I wanted to find a way when I was in the role and then subsequently to make sure that there was a deal that we could all get behind. Now, we had a deal that saw the whole of the United Kingdom leave the EU together in exactly the same way. That deal wasn't acceptable. It wasn't acceptable to that side of the House, and it wasn't acceptable to many of my honourable and right honourable friends. I recognise and I acknowledge why that was the case. They felt it would have meant us being too close to the European Union, and I fully respect that. We then had a deal presented to us by the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Now, there were many faults with that deal, but I believed the Prime Minister when he said that he wanted me to vote for that deal, that it was important for the people of Northern Ireland. And I was prepared to do that, even though I knew that there would result in checks on goods on the Irish Sea, even though that was clear from that agreement. But I was prepared to do that because it's so important for Northern Ireland, and my Prime Minister asked me to vote for it. Now, we must remember that when the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was drawn up and the Northern Ireland Act was enacted, we and the United Kingdom and Ireland were both members of the EU. So that meant many of the issues did not have to be codified. We didn't have to set out what happened to goods travelling. We didn't have to set out rights, because those rights came from our joint, but both of us having membership of the EU. Leaving the EU means that some of these issues now need to be codified. They can only be done through negotiation. They can only be done by there being accommodation made on both sides. What the Prime Minister has come back with the Windsor Framework shows enormous accommodation actually from the EU side. The Stormont break is an absolutely extraordinary thing for the EU to agree to, and people around the world are looking at what we have achieved and congratulating our right honourable friend the Prime Minister for what he has achieved. So I say to this House, what is the alternative to the Windsor Framework? What is it we think we're going to get? There is nothing better on the table. This is a significant move forward, and I urge my honourable and right honourable friends to vote for it.
Hilary Benn. Very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. I must confess that when I read the Windsor Framework, I was surprised and pleasantly surprised, because as the Secretary of State told the House earlier, there are things in there I didn't think the negotiation would manage to achieve, and it's to the great credit of the negotiators. I would also say it is to the great credit of the DUP that they have achieved so much in this agreement. And the EU has had to move a long way. And I think it is a very sensible proposal, because leaving the European Union always confronted us with a choice about what to do about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Apart from those who say, well, that's not my problem, leave it to the EU, everybody knew that some arrangement had to be put in place. The result was the protocol. It didn't work. The Windsor Framework, I think, provides a way forward. And the Stormont break, in particular, answers the point that I've heard members of the DUP make in this House about future EU legislation, because the break is available. The second point I want to make is to respond very directly to the point the Right Honourable Gentleman for Lagan Valley made about existing EU law that continues to apply in the European Union. Many of those bits of legislation have applied in the European Union, in Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom for years. For years. Have they impacted on the ability of Northern Ireland businesses to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom? No, they have not. And they apply in Great Britain because of EU retained law. Now, the government has a choice when it decides which of those bits of retained law it wants to dispose of or change through the EU retained law bill, to what extent it wants to create divergence. I suspect that by the time we get to the end of this year, many of those pieces of legislation will still be applying in Great Britain, because divergence creates problems. It's the point that the former Prime Minister, who is in her place, made in one of her speeches shortly after the referendum. She said divergence results in us having to make a choice. And the final point I want to make is that it is very striking that businesses will take decisions for themselves. There was a recent example. The EU decided to reduce the amount of permitted arsenic in baby foods. Now, what did manufacturers in Britain do in response? They didn't wait for the government to say, well, we might or might not follow suit. They said, henceforth, we will, of course, produce baby foods matching the EU standard, because they want to continue to be able to sell their products. And ultimately, businesses will decide the standard that works for them. This is a very sensible measure. I congratulate the negotiators, and I really hope the House is going to vote for it.
Sir Geoffrey Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we must avoid the danger of hyperbole, and I hope I don't disappoint my honourable friends on the front bench by saying that I do not think we can characterise this as the last word that will ever be spoken on this subject. But it does represent material and real progress. And if I had seen 3 years ago, if my right honourable friend and I had seen in 2019 a similar flexibility on behalf of the European Union, history might have turned out rather differently. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has achieved considerable things with this agreement. No, it is not the last word. Yes, it is true that to any of those who prize the constitutional principles my honourable friend for Stone has spoken of, it will always leave a lasting sense of dissatisfaction that there are certain rules that apply in Northern Ireland that do not apply on the mainland of Great Britain. But Northern Ireland is a special case. It was already recognised to be a special case when the Good Friday Agreement was introduced, and when even then, by the British-Irish Agreement, the full and absolute sovereignty of the United Kingdom government was abridged by the arrangements that were put in place then in 1997. For those of us who are unionists, there will always be an aspiration to an ever-increasing proximity between us. But the stage we have now reached is that this agreement represents a significant and major achievement by this government. It requires, compels, commands the assent of every member on this side of the House, I fully believe. For it is a serious and significant improvement on the protocol as it was agreed in 2019. And why would we not at least agree to an improvement, even if we say at the same time it is not the last and final word? And so, looking back through the last few years with a degree of regret, nostalgia even for those times perhaps, I commend most strongly to this House, urgently to this House, the virtues and merits of this important and real staging post on the pathway, ultimately, to what I hope will be a final settlement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the very brief amount of time that I have, I'll make a number of short points. Look, we don't like the Stormont break for a number of reasons. I would never have agreed the Stormont break. I think it damages and clouds the investor proposition. It has no specific role for the human rights or equality commissions. The break can be pulled before the committee can even finish its work on scrutiny. And most importantly, I think it's a very bad idea, given the number of years I spent in Stormont, to give the DUP a veto over anything. I want to just say something as well, Mr. Speaker, about some of the people in this House who will go in and vote against this today. Former Prime Ministers, members of the ERG, all of whom supported the protocol that had no Stormont break in it, that had far more checks for businesses in it. They're more interested in internal Tory politics than they are in the wishes and interests of the people in Northern Ireland. And I would urge the DUP to learn the lesson of the past few years. The people you can trust, the people who want to work with you, are sitting right here. They're not over there on the backbenches of the Tory, Tory party. I will.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for giving way. I just want to say two things. The people that we trust are the people who elected us to stand for them. Secondly, the veto that was given to the DUP was given to the DUP by the people of Northern Ireland, as the honourable member will well know, who voted in a referendum for the Belfast Agreement, and that includes a veto for unionists, and therefore when he decries that, he's decrying the agreement that his party supported.
Of course, the agreement that the right honourable member didn't support. But the reality is we will vote for this because it has been made very clear that this is a vote on the whole framework. And we've been through many a negotiation in the past. We know, we understand when the negotiation is done and a decision has to be made. And in every single negotiation, in every single agreement there have been parts of those agreements that we haven't liked, but we've had to stomach it for the greater good of the people of Northern Ireland. We see the unionist concerns. We see many of them, most of them addressed in this agreement, and we are prepared to make the decision on that basis. But let me make this very clear to this House. If the DUP still refuse to go into government after all of this, more and more people, I can guarantee you, will figure out that the best way to make the north of Ireland work is within a new Ireland. That is where this is going, and people should be very aware of that. The Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley, the Secretary of State and myself were all in the United States last week. We know that President Biden has appointed Joe Kennedy as an economic envoy to try to take full advantage of dual market access. We met investors, we met senior members of the US administration who want to help us bring jobs to places like Derry that have been left behind over many years. This is a huge opportunity. It is facing us, it is right in our face. Dual market access that people around this House would, as somebody said earlier, give their left arm to have for their own constituents. Why, oh why, despite some concerns, even that I have within all of that, why would you give that up? The most important thing to remember though, Mr. Speaker, it's done. It's over. The negotiation is finished. The British government, the European Union are moving forward, they're moving on, they're dealing with other issues. It's time now to deal with the crisis in our health service, which is at the point of collapse, to deal with the economic stagnation, to get into Stormont, to do the work on behalf of the people, and to come back together again and work the common ground. There is no other alternative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am a passionate Brexiteer, and I still think our future outside of the European Union is the best possible thing for the United Kingdom. But above all else, I'm a passionate unionist, and it really does pain me, like my right honourable friend, the member for Skipton and Ripon, to see that here we are again having these same discussions that we had in the hung Parliament of 2017 to 19. But for so many of us now, we do believe the deal that's been struck by the Prime Minister with support from the front bench from other passionate Brexiteers, this is the best possible deal. And at any time over the last 7 years, if we'd been offered this deal as a United Kingdom as the way forward, we would have bitten their arms off. And it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, the greatest pity that the DUP, honourable members and right honourable members opposite are not going to support this deal today. It seems to me that this is a superb deal for people who live in Northern Ireland. And whilst I fully respect the views and the knowledge of my honourable friend, the member for Stone, I do think that the constitutional issue has to be taken as slightly, only very slightly different to the issue that faces us today. Today we're looking at a deal that really will work so much better for the people of Northern Ireland and for our union. And as my right honourable friend, the member for West Horwich and Devon says, this will not be, in all likelihood, the last we hear on this subject. But let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. Let's move forward as one United Kingdom and vote for this SI.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear what we're debating here today. We're debating a lock or a break, which is necessary because the government has allowed the EU to impose its law on part of the United Kingdom. And the result of that is that we now have a border between one part of the United Kingdom and the other part of the United Kingdom, a border which is going to be reinforced very shortly by the building of physical posts which will be used to monitor trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, where goods which are going into Northern Ireland purely for the consumption in Northern Ireland will be checked, 100% customs checks and 120 physical checks. And that can be varied, of course, by the EU. And what's the answer, government's answer to it? Well, unionists can make a protest about it, they can sign a petition of concern. By the way, a petition of concern, which if there's anything will destabilise the Northern Ireland Assembly, it's the constant use of the petition of concern, and the members behind me will confirm that. So, first of all, there's a limit on what can be done. And secondly, despite what the Secretary of State has said, that he would be bound to, in fact, he would have no option to, other than listen to the petition of concern from unions. There's a whole section in this bill which tells us grounds on which he can refuse to do it. And even when he does, if he does accept it, he then has to go to the Joint Committee and he has to exercise a veto which he knows will lead to material impacts for the United Kingdom. And that we can be absolutely sure. If it's a choice between disrupting relations with the EU, ironically, this Windsor Framework is presented on the basis that it's to normalise relations with the EU. If that's the case, how likely is it that we're going to pick a fight with them over the implementation of some EU law in Northern Ireland? The truth is, this is not a Stormont break, it's a Stormont fake. It should be rejected by this House. It doesn't protect the Union, it doesn't protect democracy in Northern Ireland, and it will not get the Assembly back and running again.
Well done. 20 seconds, John Redwood.
The government should not put this to a vote now. This will not work. It cannot work as a break because Stormont will not meet because of it. And it gives amazing powers to the European Union.
Order. The question is, as on the order paper, as many in that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Aye. Division, clear the lobby. The question is the motion related to the division. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No! Tellers for the ayes, Andrew Stevenson and Steve Double. For the noes, Ian Paisley and Paul Gervin.